So, welcome to June's Steps Collective monthly meetup on convening. Um, Firstly, thank you all for coming. Secondly, I will be doing a little bit of theme intro, and then we'll be doing a little bit of group work, and then a little bit of discussion about that group work. The dog's making a nice little sort of hello dog. Hello dog, what are you doing? What are you up to? Yeah, it's fine. So the dog is convening as well. So firstly, to share then, where should we go? Let's go here. And I'll send you a link to this, but I'll just kind of like walk you around thoughts of why I picked this word as the theme for this month's meetup. So, as he says, looking down the list of who's here, many of you are aware. The Systemic Design Framework by a Design Council from 2022 has 4 really interesting roles for change makers, as it describes them. So it's systems thinker, designer maker, leader and storyteller, connector and convener. And I found this really useful in lots of ways. So for instance, we put them into the regenerative design field kit as the major suits, because they feel like sort of like different ways of thinking about a project, whether it's you playing those different roles, or more often thinking about who do I need to convene around a project, or who is already convened around a project or an initiative who is doing these things. And then, funnily enough, we had a conversation. Andrea, I've pulled you up already. Myself and Andy and Andrea and Tobin Shadlin had a really good conversation earlier this week about sort of like, are designers really taught to convene? So this is Andrea's research question as part of her master's in strategic design at Elisava in Barcelona. And I think it's a really interesting perspective of sort of like, are we taught to convene? Do we just learn it? What does that look like? Do we mean the same things every time we talk about convening? And Andrea's question had come about as sort of like, oh, she was interested in talking to some of us who have convened the Steps Collective stuff. So we were discussing that. But I also then started, for the purposes of this, mapping out different things that I have been to as a convening recently. So just over the last week or so. So last week, so convening can be just very simple. So basically, this is some of our nature watch group on our local housing estate who I convened with a very simple purpose. I said, we've been asked to put an article in the local magazine. We need a picture of us. Who's around? Come onto the common and we'll just take a picture and then we'll use that. So that's a kind of a very, very simple ask, but a longer standing group of people who are connected around a thing. And I think it's all that if we weren't already connected around a thing, it'd have been very hard just to ask people to come along and do something as part of that. Also last week, I went to a nature-centric housing workshop, which was essentially, I think it's probably Chris Daniels' fault. Chris invited us along to the thing at Chatham House as part of what was the official title, Chris? Regenerative. Is he still there?
I was changing Wi-Fi network.
What was the official title of the regenerative thing that I met Matt at? Oh, you're on mute.
1 second. Let me find it. I'm in front of my calendar. Is Matt here?
I don't think he is.
No, I don't think I'm gonna. Oh wait, you're talking about the thing at Chatham.
Yeah, Chatham House. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. The Regenerative Design Policy Lab.
Regenerative Design Policy Lab, and it was interesting that sort of that. So from one convening, you meet people and you go, oh, actually, we share a purpose. There's an interesting thing here. You should come to that thing as well. So like a convening can also spawn another convening. Then on Friday last week, my friend Mark Earls said, our mutual friend Alex Bentley is coming to town. He's interesting thoughts on AI and what we can learn about social data collecting, which is much, much older as an understanding, in order to avoid AI model collapse or think about what we're really putting into these things. So rather than be a big sort of like conference, it was very much a sort of like, let's convene something where Alex speaks to the kind of fellows at New Speak House, and we just do a little sort of like conversational piece. So that was a kind of like, we think about the scale of convening and go, so like, who are the right people who need to be here to discuss that topic? Then on Monday, in preparation in part for Content Rising, we had our kind of little step slow walk to Wakehurst with Charlie, one of the organisers, and just like having that chance just to say sort of like, it's a really weird time to convene a thing Monday at 10 a.m. in a town in Sussex. And yet there was a brilliant walk with 6 of us just sort of like, and the conversation was amazing. And also Nat Hunter came, who was the originator of those 4 systemic design roles. And then, of course, yesterday was Content Rising, which Rob and I were at, up at Wakehurst. And that was, and I was discussing it as people were coming into the call, the kind of like the topic was interesting because it was kind of like, it kind of was specific, but kind of not. And so actually the sort of like the less specific the purpose, the more diverse an audience you can pull to people who go, so, oh, well, I'm kind of like adjacently related to that, so I'll go along and see what that is. And so you end up with sort of like a group of diverse speakers and a group of diverse participants, which leads to a much richer thing, I think. And there's echoes of that, of sort of like kind of like the naughties and I'll be calling them teenies. The naughties and teenies, kind of like the web and the internet as an organizing principle, that you could just pull people who were kind of interested in that and applying it to their work in different ways. Maybe nature and regenerative is becoming something like that. Oh, and at the sort of like this is, I've put this in here for all of you, but Esther specifically. Someone read out Adrienne Marie Brown's radical gratitude spell of the sort of little, something for you to read to people, and say, you are all here and you're all the right people, and we are grateful you are here and your work is enough. And in the conversation setting this up, I think the step stewards were also talking about convening. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be the sort of like, you go, I am here as the authority, singular, and you will all come and listening. So that's a kind of smorgasbord of kind of like convening. Specifically for today, I started thinking, okay, so we use the word collective rather than community for the Steps Collective, which feels more action orientated and more verby. Communities, and I'm going to send you a link to this board, Charlie, so you get all this. Communities can feel kind of, sedentary is maybe the wrong word, although that can be true for some communities, but almost passive. It's a connection thing, but without a purpose. It's a kind of, let's what is it? We're bounded around a thing, but maybe we're not trying to do something. So in these essay, which Fiona and Heidi sent over, also spoke a lot to that. It's kind of sort of like, how do we sort of like get doing things rather than just connecting? What's the kind of like the advance rather than just like having the kind of like the network in place? And when you dig into the etymology of convene, you go, okay, so convene is to come together, to meet in the same place, and usually for some public purpose. And I think that for the sort of like, for something that kind of like unifies the Steps Collective and all the things that we've done and try to do and want to do, is that we are a collective that convenes. So there's usually some form of purpose. And then, but there's also a kind of sort of like, well, it's a collective approach to it. It's not just like one agenda and one purpose and whatever else and so on. It's just holding a container that's enough to allow people to convene different things within that. So, with all that in mind, I'm going to step in, pun not intended, to some group work shortly, where we go, okay, so let's imagine ways, purposes, and so on, in which steps as a collective might convene a thing. So future things that you might want to see convened, and to think about who is there, where are they, where is there, how were they invited, and what's the purpose. To start that, though, I'm going to read the words. And it was only in kind of like seeing the kind of like the radical spell that I pointed to earlier that I went, oh, okay, cool. This is kind of like, and we've talked about this and like this, on when Andrea and Andy and Tobin and I were talking on Wednesday, it was kind of like calling it spell is kind of go, oh, that's maybe a bit woo for me and a bit woo for others, but actually sort of like just a little landing in the kind of like the power of words and just getting across to people kind of like what this is, and therefore it sets the kind of like the trellising for sort of like here's kind of like some optional things to grow up rather than scaffolding which puts you in boxes. So I shall read the words and then open the floor for any kind of like comments, thoughts, but then we'll sort of like dive into group work. So, surely easy place to start. As we navigate these transitional times and traverse the emerging regenerative territory, we commonly find that there is not always an obvious path to follow. With many questions to navigate, yet no single answer to guide us, we look for the footprints of others to consider where we might take our own next steps. However, even the most experienced travellers in these spaces would admit they're continually finding their way, unsure of what is around the next bend or over the next peak. This is an ongoing dance with uncertainty, switching between action and inspiration, acting before we think too much, and thinking before we go too far. So, although taking the next or first step can also feel like the hardest, know that you are not walking alone. Whether or not your own trail will become a valuable part for others doesn't matter. We help each other towards a regenerative tomorrow, not as experts, but as parents, neighbours, colleagues, and citizens. All our stories are unique and all voices are welcome. There are many paths up the same mountain. So, I'm going to share this Miro board, but while I do, any thoughts, reaction to that initially? Yeah, the chat on.
Just to build on that, I think the most important thing that we're all learning in different circumstances and situations is kind of active listening and kind of trying to remove our biases. And I think that's really important because it's constantly throughout all of these situations, especially the ones that you've talked to, John. Thank you for sharing those examples. It's really easy for us to go, oh, that won't work, or this won't work, or this. And I think it's really damaging behavior that we have to unlearn ourselves because we're either objective driven or however. And so I think it's really important when we look at these different styles that we're just trying to add to it and grow and kind of reflect and build from it. And all of these different things work in different situations. And sometimes also the pre-work that happens as people arrive, like giving them a little briefing, like the words that Lizzie first wrote, and then everyone, it builds on these things because it gives people permission. And as soon as you start, and that was, I think, the most exciting thing about yesterday, is that it gave people permission to talk to each other and they could see a common passion. And I think that's something that's really, really common. Yes, and exactly, Carl, just building on your, it's how you build on other people's concepts, and it's exactly that. And it's something that we all have to unlearn and relearn. And I think I'm still very reflective that I'm learning that all the time. So yeah, thank you for that, John.
Anything else? What else?
I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts that came up for me. So I think the first was with the etymology of the word convening, and it said usually with a purpose. And I think convening does have value in and of itself. Like I think some of the best convening I've been part of hasn't had a clear purpose. It's just had maybe a common thread. And then the purpose emerges through the convening. So I think even if you're just gathering people together for the sake of gathering, then I think that does have value in and of itself. And then the second thing that came up, which is something I've come across recently, is the idea of critical yeast. So it's John Paul Lederach, and he basically talks about in movements, it's rarely critical mass that actually causes the movement to change. It's the right combination of a small group of people in unlikely combinations, he says, in a new quality of relationship. So it's like, who are the right people to pull together rather than how do we pull the most people together? And then that draws focus to how do we include the right voices, and that kind of thing. This is a new area to me, so I'm sure people on the call maybe have also come across it and may know more. But I thought I'd throw that in there.
I totally love that critical. I just went looking for it, typing in the things, going, I've no heard that. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for that. It's the and funnily enough, there's a place in Brighton called Plus X. And back in the day, we did some early work with them on thinking that sort of how do you spec out this new innovation hub next to university and so on, because they wanted to kind of to lay the plans for all of the workshop material and machines and everything that you need and so on. But we got to a place, and maybe this is related, where we just used the sourdough metaphor, and it was kind of like, you are literally bringing flour and water, but you have to kind of walk round Brighton and see what takes before you decide what sort of rooms and machines and whatever else you're going to need and so on. And that's almost like the gathering of the yeast in that way as well. You're going to look, what's here? If I open the top of my kind of like kiln or jar with flour and water in it, we're only going to make something that's kind of like very locally responsive. If we're not trying to kind of force another yeast into the local environment. I'm stretching the analogy now, I think.
I mean, if it helps to give, so I heard it from Resilience Earth on a bioregioning course that I'm doing, and an example they gave was effectively in conflict resolution in a municipality, and rather than trying to engage the whole community in resolving this issue, they brought together an individual that represented each facet of the community, and so a lot of attention was paid on how do we bring in someone who brings the voice of parts of the community that haven't been given a voice in this issue. And they just worked with that core group of people for like a year, I think, and focused on that. And then the influence of those people within those communities then effectively dissolved the issue rather than maybe solving the issue, which was interesting in itself. But yeah, I think the idea of being really intentional about who you convene is what I took from it. But yeah, probably a whole area to look into itself. Another rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, you've just volunteered for a future session. Well done. That's what happens round here, Tony. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to split people into 4 groups. He says, I haven't done breakout rooms in Zoom for ages. Hang on. Assign automatically. Okay, so we're going to have 4 groups. We are going to spend 15 minutes. Has everyone got a link to the board? So I'll just repaste it in case some people have joined late. So there we go. There's the board again if you haven't got it. Essentially, there's some material on the board there as well. There's kind of like, think about the past. So what good convening means to you? How does it make you feel? What are good experiences you've been passed off? And then I've also dropped digital versions of the 10 convening questions from the toolkit just in there. But really just think about sort of like what sort of thing could steps convene in future? Who'd be there? How'd they get there? What would it be? Is there a purpose? So, oh, someone catch Hubert up as well. Hi, Hubert. Welcome. You're about to be dropped into a group. Yeah, they're all very friendly. They'll help you out. Right. 3, 2, 1. Open all rooms.
We were just hitting our stride there.
Well, we can do the next. We'll do a follow-up meeting. We'll do like a 9-hour special just to get into the bottom of this. Thank you so much, all. I'm not going to ask for volunteers. We're going to start with team 3.
Okay.
60 seconds.
60 seconds. So, Chris, do you want to summarize, or do you want me to summarize your post-it of your summary?
Yeah, I can do it. Am I going first? No. Oh.
Go. 49
Yep.
seconds left.
Okay, sorry. Really, the thing was the idea that there's something special about actually being in the same place as people, particularly if they're people that are coming from a very long distance. And we didn't quite think of what the thing itself would be, but something that is cheap enough that people can get their bosses to sign off on it, while having enough apparent international clout that it becomes worth people traveling around the world for that one time when they do that one big international trip. And the example I used was the Prague Quadrennial, which is a quadrennial conference in Prague that, because of its rarity, you get people traveling from like New Zealand. They'll structure their summer around going to it, and you suddenly have this meeting. You have these different meetings with people that that you wouldn't get otherwise. And it's that thing of that value of the space in between the actual events.
Thank you.
I shouldn't have tried to do that.
No, but I love that we sort of with two long now people in one room, and I went, you know what we should do? We should do a conference every 25 years. But that's a really nice thought. That sort of like, rather than doing lots and lots of small things, you do sort of like one big super thing that's kind of like, this will come up in 10 years' time.
But it has to be super thing with enough space in it as well, that it doesn't get overwhelmed by content. How do you do it?
Thank you. Team 1.
Shall I do a quick summary? Okay, so where we had our richest conversation was around the who's in the room and the joy of being around like minds, but the importance of the missing voices, the unlike minds, and how to inhabit perspectives that are really different to your own. So our suggestion for a small thing that would be really fun to do at a Steps Collective session is a constellations exercise with a question in the middle and everyone having an assigned role that could be you're just a different stakeholder, or actually you're a river system, or you are a force like the financial system, or whatever it might be, that forces all of us for a period of time to take on a role and a perspective, a thought process, a way of being in the world that is radically different from the one that we would usually bring. And that would be really fun to do. So that's our thing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Team 4.
Don't mind talking for us. Is that okay? Okay,
Go.
goodness. Pressure. Basically, we were chatting about the white man in the room, which I think is really important. Hey, man, Nina, you raised it. I'm calling it out. I am. And I think there were two things that came up, is how we can focus on what people bring, because everybody brings things with them, and expertise and skills and elements. Super important. And then making sure you are empowering people to to go, hey, that's really insightful. We don't have that. You have that. Amazing. But also how you can have international cross-cultural exchanges or events or activities or something that happen at the same time, even if they border based on time zones, so that people can share things across culture. Could be really simple, neat, and pretty cool. So you can then go, what's it like in your culture? What's it like in my culture? Was that a positive summary, Nina, Andy?
Yes.
Amazing. And I just want to extend one thing, John, if I've got 10 seconds. Thank you. 7 seconds. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing these points and perspectives. It's such an honor to listen and learn from you all. And I think we need that culture more. So cheers for that. Thank you, Nina, Andy.
Thank you. So, final team. Who is talking?
I'm happy to, but while you're others can, if they
Thumbs up coming. Tony, 1 minute.
All right. So we actually only got onto the practical actions by the end of it, but we had some interesting conversations about urgency, the initial energy, and then these kind of longer term convenings tailing off over time, or the movement tailing off. And then we talked about kind of setting a clear purpose versus letting that emerge. We talked about containers and boundaries for creating a space, a clear space for that to happen. Hubert also said that he doesn't know if there's a clear, direct Dutch translation for convening, which is interesting in itself. And potentially conflating like facilitator role with leadership role in these conversations. Both the facilitator sometimes conflates that, and the other people in that meeting can maybe expect a leadership role to come from the facilitator if they're the one doing all the talking. I think what we talked about right at the end was could we do some sort of like convening in a box? So basically equipping people to replicate a facilitated session wherever they are, with maybe whatever purpose they have, in whatever location, whatever group they have. But I guess, equipping them to recreate certain formats in certain circumstances. Happy for either of you guys to jump in and add.
Thank you. Oh, Fiona.
Oh, well, I can pop on quickly and just say I prototyped something underneath, which was like the idea of a vision chart, where it's like it starts off big. And I don't know if you've been to the optometrist, but I put some examples on there. So you start with the haiku version of what the statement is, then you have a slightly longer summary, then you have the full length summary. And I think it's just about not only showing me an easy place to start, but easy place to read for asynchronous convening before the convening. So attention spans are minimal, so you can pick your entry point.
Love it. Rob's nodding and smiling. Everyone's thank you so much for that. With 6 minutes left, I want you to invite you to do a final thing once we go. But any collective reflections on what connects these 4 things? I've got one, which is the role in whoever is doing the convening, and however it manifests is sort of like there's just kind of there's little pieces of, be it the constellation exercise or the Nina's group or indeed the haiku, sort of like going, what's the intentionality behind it, and just beginning to go, how do I make this? And I go back to the words that Shannon used in a previous Steps Collective, like trellis rather than scaffolding, just going enough that something can grow up however it wants to grow up. There's enough intentionality that it's not scaffolding in box, but it's just kind of like, we offer you this as something to grow up rather than be constrained by.
It very much sounds like the definition of culture, which is something that's cultivated, right?
Yeah. Oh, culture and cultivation. Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, I think that might need to be something dynamic, because you convene a bunch of people together around a cause, maybe. And so maybe sometimes it's just getting the people in one room, and 2 hours later there's an action plan or whatever. And sometimes people will look at each other and think, well, we like each other maybe, or we like the cause, but what on earth is going on here? And I think it very much is the people that are showing up that will determine that. So it's almost something that you, as the convener, and then again, you assign a lot of agency to a particular person. But I think that's just the way it is. So maybe powers as well. Who knows? But it's kind of a.
So that's I didn't think we'd have time to cover it today, and we won't. But I'll maybe do a different session on it. But there's a kind of a community power compass tool just at the bottom of the kind of like the charts, which talks about that power, and also just like the powers and the freedoms, and thinking about sort of like in any sort of like community or gathering, whatever it happens to be, just going, what powers are there and need there be, but what freedoms could exist, and how do you sort of like make sure people have got freedom to reinvent and recreate and do these different things. Thank you. The last thing I would like people to do is there's a board that says principles, not rules. If you just sum up with one principle of sort of like, given what you've heard from others and the discussion you had in your own group, principles for convening steps, collective things, what would that principle be? To Lizzie's point about a safe space for unfinished thoughts, we're coming to the end of the session, but the board's open, the board's there. Drop things on that occur. I noticed that the chat has persisted from the previous Steps Collective monthly thing, which is quite useful. So next time you come to one of these, all of that will be there. Any final remarks from anyone?
Which chat has persisted? The one in the mirror or the one in the...
No, the one in the Zoom here, because I can scroll up to the previous monthly session, or at least
Whereas
I
I can't. I can't.
Ah,
I think
okay.
it's your host privileges.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I can download the. Shall I download the chat and post it on that board as well, so that all the links are saved? Thank you for coming together to talk about convening today. Our next convening, Esther, is
next Tuesday. I posted it in the chat, but it's basically a continuation of many of these conversations also from last month on participation or citizenship. But we have Andy from the Edinburgh Regenerative Futures Fund, where they're applying a lot of this in practice in Edinburgh around participation. It's a 10-year fund. There's convenings planned throughout those 10 years. So if you want to hear more about how this is looking from a practitioner and bring your questions, we'll be doing that during lunchtime next Tuesday, June 17th. Link in the chat.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, everyone. We will see you at a future convening